Montana Territory, early December 1883. Snow beat down hard on the Bitterroot Valley. And by the time Preston O'Rourke stepped into his barn that morning, he knew something was wrong. The horses were restless. Not the usual shifting of hooves or low huffs in the cold, but alert, ears pricked toward the hayloft. Preston narrowed his eyes, his boots crunching over frozen straw as he stepped inside. His rifle was still hanging by the door, untouched. He did not need it, not yet. He climbed the wooden ladder slow, aware of every creak, every breath. When his head rose above the loft's edge, he saw her, a girl no, a woman curled tight under an old horse blanket, shivering so hard her teeth chattered. Her dress was torn across one sleeve and her hands were red and raw. Her eyes were open, wide and scared, but she did not move. Preston did not speak. He just shrugged out of his thick wool coat and held it toward her. "Take it." She stared at him. "I am not going to hurt you," he said. "You are shaking like a leaf, come on." "Take it?" She reached slowly, like she half expected him to strike her for it. Her fingers brushed his as she took the coat, and he felt a tremble that was not entirely from the cold. She pulled it around her shoulders like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "What is your name?" he asked. "Pearla," she whispered. "Pearla Lane," he nodded once. "Preston O'Rourke." She looked down. "You alone?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "How long have you been up here?" "I do not know. 2 days, maybe. I was walking, got caught in the snow. I saw your barn and climbed up. I was just trying to stay alive." Preston looked at her, really looked, skin too pale, lips cracked. She had not eaten in at least a day, maybe more. "You got any people?" Pearla's voice cracked. "No, that was all, just no." Like the word was heavy enough to cover everything. He climbed the rest of the way into the loft and sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "You are safe here, just so you know." Pearla's eyes filled, but she blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. "I got 2 kids," Preston said, quiet now. "Boy and a girl. They were left here last winter. Their mama dropped them off and rode east. Never came back. I raised them best I can. This place gets loud sometimes, but it is warm. And there is always food." Pearla looked at him like she did not know whether to believe it, like she could not imagine a man offering something without expecting something back. "I ain't asking anything from you," Preston said. "Just saying you do not have to freeze." She looked down at the coat wrapped around her. "I will go. I just need the storm to let up. I will leave when. You are not going anywhere until you are warm and fed," he said. "And even then, only if you want to." Pearla looked at him again. This time she held his gaze a little longer. There was something there, worn-down fear, maybe, but also a flicker of disbelief. Like she had not expected kindness to sound so plain. From downstairs, a child's voice called, "Pa." Preston stood. "That is my girl, Winnie. I will be back." He climbed down and disappeared, but only for a moment. Pearla heard soft voices below, muffled footsteps, then the slam of the barn's side door as the cold wind returned. When Preston came back up, he carried a blanket, a thick slab of cornbread, and a tin cup of milk. Pearla took them like they were gold. "You want to come in the house?" he asked. She shook her head. "All right," he said. "Then I will bring you a better blanket later and another coat if you want it." She looked down at the food in her lap. "Thank you." He gave a small nod. "You are welcome." Then he left her alone again, closing the barn door behind him with care. By the next morning, Pearla could not feel her feet. She tried to stretch them, rub them through her stockings, but her toes were numb and stiff. The wind outside howled through the barn boards, and she huddled tighter under Preston's coat, still too proud to knock on the door of the house just across the yard. But she had not eaten in over 12 hours, and her body was done pretending she could survive this on her own. Preston was already waiting when she opened the barn door and stepped out into the snow. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching her with quiet patience. Pearla wavered, her knees trembling. He came down the steps fast and caught her just before she fell. "I got you," he said. She was too cold to argue. He carried her inside, past the warm smell of coffee and wood smoke, past wide eyes from a little boy at the table and a girl with braids halfway down her back. He placed her gently on the settee near the stove and wrapped another blanket over her legs. Pearla tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "SHH," Preston said. "You are safe." The girl, Winnie, stepped forward with a cup of something steaming. "Here," she said, shy but brave. "It is sweet tea." Pearla reached with shaking hands. The boy, Warren, watched her with a serious stare. He looked barely 8, but there was something older in his eyes. "Do you have any kids?" he asked. Pearla blinked. "No." He nodded slowly, then went back to his toast. Preston crouched by the fire, feeding it another log. "You can stay here as long as you want, Pearla." "I mean that." She looked around. The home was small but clean, a Bible on the shelf. A tin of peppermint sticks by the window. It smelled like cinnamon and pine. Her eyes welled up again, but she wiped them quick. "I do not know what I can give in return," she whispered. Preston sat across from her, elbows on his knees. "You do not have to give anything, just stay warm, let yourself rest." Pearla stared at him, heart pounding hard against her ribs. No man had ever looked at her like that, with nothing but calm steadiness. No hunger, no demands, just something solid. "Something safe." "I have not had a home since I was 15, she said. Preston's voice was low. "You do now." Pearla's breath hitched, and for the first time in 10 years she let herself believe it might be true. Pearla's second morning in the O'Rourke home broke soft and gray. Snow still fell, but gentler now, like the land had finally taken its breath. She sat on a stool by the hearth, her feet wrapped in dry wool, a basin of warm water at her side. The pain had begun to return to her toes, a good sign, Preston had said. Meant they still had feeling. Winnie knelt beside her, carefully dipping a cloth and pressing it to Pearla's ankle. "Does it sting here?" Pearla flinched slightly. "A bit, not too bad. You must have walked a long way." Winnie's voice was quiet, not nosy, just wondering. "Far enough," Pearla answered. Winnie didn't press. She just kept working, her small hands steady. Preston stood by the window, fastening the last button on his coat. "I'll have to ride to Hamilton this afternoon. The fence behind the chicken runs near flat. Need new boards." Pearla looked up. "Shouldn't the road be slick?" "It will be," he replied. "But the wagon's loaded for it, and I won't be long. I'll bring back flour, maybe a bit of tobacco if old Levy's got it." Warren, seated at the table with a slate and stub of chalk, didn't look up. "Can I go?" Preston shook his head. "Not this time, son." Pearla picked up on the hesitation in Warren's voice, then disappointment smoothed into quiet acceptance. She knew that feeling too well. After Preston left, the cabin settled into a hush broken only by the scrape of chalk and the crackle of the stove. Pearla helped Winnie fold linens by the fire, the girl humming under her breath without realizing it. The warmth wasn't just in the room, it was in the rhythm of the place, the slow and certain way the day unfolded. It made something ache inside Pearla that she couldn't quite name. By midday, she was strong enough to stand without wobbling. She moved cautiously, still unfamiliar with the space. She reached for a broom leaning against the far wall. "You don't have to do that," Winnie said, lifting her head from her stitching. "Pa said you should rest." "I've had too much rest," Pearla said softly. "My hands need work." She swept carefully, each motion grounding her in the room. She noticed the scuff marks on the floor where Warren's boots dragged, the soft trail of flour near the hearth. Real signs of life. Not the kind that could be faked. Winnie glanced up, then stood. She walked over to the cupboard and pulled open a narrow drawer. She handed Pearla a folded apron. "Here, it's Mama's, but it's clean." Pearla hesitated. "You sure?" Winnie nodded. "You're not a stranger anymore." The words struck something deep. Pearla didn't know how to answer right away. She simply tied the apron around her waist, fingers moving slower than usual. Later, while Warren napped curled up in a quilt, Pearla stood at the table, slicing turnips into neat half-moons. She worked silently, her mind tracing old lessons learned in kitchens where no one spoke kindly. Her hands knew what to do, even if her thoughts wandered. "You cook much?" Winnie asked from across the room. "Used to," Pearla replied. "Stopped for a while." "Why?" Pearla paused, knife hovering above the board. "Didn't have a reason to." She didn't say more. Winnie didn't ask her to. Not long after, the clatter of hooves approached. Pearla stepped to the window and saw Preston leading the horse-pulled wagon through the gate, snow caked at the wheels. He moved slower than he had that morning, a limp in his gait more pronounced now. When he came through the door, he set down the crate he carried and leaned against the wall, breath misting. "You all right?" Pearla asked, stepping forward before she could stop herself. "Just twisted my knee a bit unloading the planks." He winced slightly. "Nothing to fret over. You should sit," she said, already nudging the chair back from the table. He looked at her a moment before lowering himself with a tired sigh. "You been on your feet?" Pearla wiped her hands on the apron. "Some. I like moving when I can. I can see that." He nodded toward the swept floor and the now bubbling pot on the stove. "Place looks fine." Winnie brought him a mug of hot water and honey. "We're having stew. Pearla knows how to slice things even." Preston turned to Pearla. "That's so," she gave a small shrug. "It's a start." That night, after the children went to bed, Pearla sat near the fire, mending a pair of worn mittens she'd found in a basket by the door. Preston leaned beside the hearth, one leg stretched out, the other bent with the boot off. "You always been out this way?" he asked after a long silence. "Since I was 17, she said, threading her needle again. "Before that, Arkansas, near the Ouachita foothills." "What brought you west?" She didn't answer right away. Something needed leaving. Preston didn't push. "I understand that," she glanced over. Dakota territory. I was younger than I should have been when I left, worked with cattle drives, then rail lines, ended up here. And the children," he rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Their mother came through last winter, said she couldn't raise them. Left them with me." "You knew her?" "Once," he said simply. Pearla nodded and went back to stitching. The fire crackled low. "You'll stay then?" he asked softly. She met his eyes. "I don't know yet." He accepted that. Didn't push or promise, but something had shifted. Neither of them named it, but it hung between them now, quiet and steady, like the snow softening the world outside. By the fifth morning, the sky broke open blue, and the wind settled low in the pines. Pearla stood outside the cabin with a basket under one arm, her breath visible but the air kinder than it had been. She wore a shawl Preston had brought down from the attic, smelling faintly of cedar. The sleeves covered her wrists now. She bent to gather the eggs Warren had missed the day before, brushing frost from the edges of the coop. The hens shifted around her boots, cautious but calm. She moved with a quietness that didn't startle them. Winnie came up behind her with a jar of cracked corn and handed it over without a word. They worked side by side, and when they finished, Pearla passed her the basket. Winnie took it like it was something shared, not handed down. Inside, Preston sat at the table with a ledger open, pencil in hand. He glanced up when Pearla came in, snow melting from her boots onto the mat. "Folk up the road lost a sheep to a catamount," he said, eyes still on the page. "I should set a trap near the north edge. Could be the same one that's been nosing around our fence." Pearla crossed to the stove and stirred the oats warming there. "You want help?" He looked at her then. "You ever set iron traps?" "No," she said. "But I've tracked game before. I can spot sign." Warren perked up from the corner. "She walks quiet, Pa. I didn't even hear her go out this morning." Pearla smiled faintly but didn't speak. Preston tapped the pencil against the edge of the ledger. "All right then, after mid-meal." They set out just after noon, bundled and steady-footed. The snow had crusted over and the pines whispered above them. Pearla followed Preston's lead, the two of them moving without hurry. His limp slowed him a little, but he didn't complain. They reached the ridge where the tracks had been seen. Preston crouched near a scuff in the snow, brushing the ice aside with his glove. Pearla knelt beside him, her brow furrowing. "Those are deep," she said. "Too deep for a fox, and see that drag line." "It's been hauling something," Preston nodded. "Could be a kill, or it's lame." He set the trap with practiced hands, covering it with snow and pine needles. Pearla watched, memorizing the way his fingers moved, how carefully he balanced pressure and spring. They didn't speak again until they were halfway back. "You always watch like that?" he asked, not unkindly. "I had to," she replied. Watching meant knowing when to stay quiet or when to run. Preston didn't answer right away. You don't have to do either here. I know, she hesitated. But I still listen close. It's a habit. They came over the rise, the cabin visible through the trees now. Smoke drifted from the chimney and the sound of Winnie's laughter carried faintly. She's a good child, Pearla said. She's strong, Preston replied. Both of them are. They had to be, Pearla's voice lowered. They don't look at me like I'm broken, not once. You're not. She didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on the porch a moment longer before they went inside. That evening, Pearla sat on the edge of the bed Preston had made up for her in the back room. The walls were plain, but someone had tacked a square of quilt over the window to keep the draft out. A small wooden cross hung above a peg where she'd hung her shawl. Preston knocked once before stepping in. I fixed the latch on the cupboard, he said. It won't swing open now. Thank you, she said. He stood there a moment, hands in his pockets. I know you've been waiting to see if this place will hold you, he said. I don't expect you to decide quick, but the children have taken to you and I've come to. Count on the way your voice sounds in this house. She looked down at her hands. I don't know what I'm supposed to be anymore. Maybe you don't have to be anything but here. She looked up. I'm not asking, he said. Just hoping. Pearla stood slowly, the room quiet but full. She walked to the doorway, close enough to see the worry in his eyes. I'll help with the wash tomorrow, she said. Preston exhaled, and it sounded almost like relief. All right. She reached for his hand just briefly. His fingers closed around hers like the gesture mattered more than words. And for the first time, Pearla didn't feel like she was passing through. She felt like she had stepped into the middle of something steady, something waiting. 3 weeks passed, marked by the slow thaw of December and the quiet rhythm of days that folded into one another like pages in a well-worn book. Pearla rose each morning before the sun crested the ridge, shoulders squared beneath her borrowed shawl, and took to work without waiting to be asked. In the lean space between winter and true spring, there wasn't much to plant yet, but there were tools to mend, shelves to wipe free of dust, and yarn to wind into balls for Winnie's steady fingers. The girl had taken to knitting in the evenings, tongue pressed to her lip as she counted stitches. Warren, less patient, sat across the room carving small animals from the leftover scraps of kindling. Preston didn't speak more than necessary, but Pearla came to know the meaning behind the way he adjusted his collar when he was thinking too hard, or how he tapped the table twice before rising when he was about to say something he'd been holding back. That morning, they were in the shed stringing wire for a new tool rack. The air inside smelled of cut oak and old grease. Pearla held the spool while Preston fed it through the eyelets he'd bolted to the wall. You're good with your hands, he said, knotting the end. Pearla kept her eyes on the wire. I had to be. Nothing broke ever got replaced, he nodded, reaching for the next length. You ever think about what you'd do if you didn't have to think about surviving? She blinked. I've never had the luxury, I know, he said. Still. If you did. Pearla leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I used to want to keep bees. There was a woman in Arkansas, Miss Elvira, she had hives behind her kitchen, said they kept her company better than any man ever had. I liked how quiet they were. How they worked with the season, not against it. Preston smiled with his eyes, not his mouth. We've got wildflower patches down past the creek. I could help you build boxes come spring. Pearla tilted her head. You offering to help me chase bees, I'm offering lumber. And time. She stared at him a long moment, then nodded once. All right. That night, a wind kicked up, sharp and whistling down the stove pipe. The children were already in bed when Pearla stood by the window, watching the trees sway. Preston sat in the corner, mending the leather strap of his saddlebag, the firelight catching the edge of his brow. Pearla spoke without turning. I saw a man hanged once. I was 14. He stole a mule and they said he wasn't right in the head, but they didn't care. My uncle made me stand there and watch. Preston didn't move. I didn't speak for a week afterward, not a word. My aunt thought I'd gone dumb, but I wasn't. I was just afraid that if I spoke, I'd say something that'd get me strung up too. She turned from the window, arms at her sides. I don't want to be afraid here. I don't want to keep waiting for something to snap. Preston set the leather aside and stood not too close. Then don't. I don't know if I can stop. You already have. You just haven't noticed yet. Pearla's breath hitched, but she didn't look away. He stepped forward slowly, his voice quiet. I don't need more than what's already here. If you want to stay, there's room, not just in the house, in the days, in the way things move forward. Pearla didn't answer with words. She stepped into his space and rested her hand over his heart, her palm still rough from the wire and the cold. He didn't flinch, just placed his hand over hers, firm and steady. She didn't need to say she was staying. It was already understood. Late January brought a thin sun and a quiet hush over the valley, the kind that settled on the land like a held breath. The days were still short, but the cold had softened just enough to let the ground show through in patches of brown earth near the barn. Pearla stood outside with her sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing the last of the winter soot from the window panes with a rag dipped in warm vinegar water. Her breath no longer smoked in the air when she exhaled. Behind her, the door creaked open. You always work like the house might run off without you, Preston said, stepping onto the porch with a tin of nails hooked on one finger and a hammer tucked under his arm. Pearla didn't pause. I don't like stillness unless I've earned it. He leaned against the post, watching her rinse the cloth. I'm fixing the gate by the stock pen. You mind if I borrow your eyes when I'm through? The latch has been slipping and I need to know if it's dragging. She wrung the rag out with both hands. I'll come now. It's been bothering me too. They walked the short stretch together, boots crunching over the gravel path. The snow had melted back from the fence line, revealing last autumn's brittle weeds. Preston handed her the latch pin while he steadied the post. It's gotten worse since the thaw, Pearla said, testing the movement. The hinge is pulling right. Preston didn't look surprised. I'll rehang it tomorrow, might need to cut a new brace. Pearla crouched to check the bottom rail. You'll need another set of hands. Already counted on yours. She glanced up, mouth tugging gently, not quite a smile, but close. You sure you're not just saying that because I don't argue? Oh, you argue, he said plainly. You're just thoughtful about when. She stood, brushing her palms clean. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant that way. They walked back to the house without speaking, the comfortable quiet of people who had learned not to fill space just to hear themselves. Inside, Winnie was piecing together scraps of muslin and cotton from a basket Pearla had dug out of the back cupboard, while Warren knelt near the hearth with a spool of twine and a bent nail, trying to fashion a trap for crows. That evening, as the stew cooled on the table and the last light faded from the hills, Preston drew something from his coat pocket and laid it beside Pearla's bowl. A folded scrap of paper, creased neat down the middle. I had Levy bring this from Miss Ola, he said. Took some doing. Pearla unfolded it slowly. The ink was fine and clear, a catalog page for bee boxes imported from Pennsylvania with hand-drawn diagrams and pricing. She looked up, stunned into silence. I figure we can build something close to this come March, he said. I've got cedar boards in the loft, just need to plane them down. She smoothed the paper flat. You remembered? I listen, he said. Pearla's fingers traced the edge of the page. No one's ever done anything like this for me. Preston's voice was steady. You've earned it without asking. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Pearla stepped outside and found Preston near the woodpile, splitting a few last logs before full dark. She watched him a moment, the sure rhythm of his body, the way he paused between each swing like he respected the work more than he needed it done. You never asked me what I did before I came here, she said, her voice quiet in the snow-dark yard. I didn't need to, he replied, setting the axe down. I want to tell you. He waited, not moving closer, just letting her speak. I worked in a boarding house in Butt. Took in laundry, cleaned rooms. The man who ran it thought kindness was weakness. I stayed because it was dry and I had nowhere else. When I left, I had 22 cents and a torn coat. Preston nodded slowly. You don't owe me any of that, I know, but I want you to know who I was. So you can see who I'm trying to be now. He stepped to her then, slow and certain, and took her hands in his. I see you, he said. And I want all of it, not just what's here now. The before, too, her breath caught and her fingers curled into his. I never thought I'd want to stay anywhere again. You don't have to want, he said. You just have to choose. She looked up at him, the stars sharp overhead, the cold forgotten. I do, she said. He kissed her then, quiet and full of promise, like the land itself had made room for them. They married 3 weeks later, with Winnie carrying a bundle of sage tied with horsehair and Warren standing tall in his best shirt. Preston carved 2 bands from ironwood, and Pearla wore hers with pride. They planted the first hive together that spring, near the wildflower patch beyond the willow grove, and by midsummer, the bees had taken to the boxes like they'd always belonged. The house grew louder, but in the best ways laughter in the kitchen, hammering in the shed, the low hum of bees drifting through open windows. Pearla kept a ledger now, tracking honey yields and winter stores. Preston built her shelves for drying herbs, and when she sang while she worked, he paused whatever he was doing just to listen. Come autumn, neighbors started bringing their children by for honey cakes and help with mending. Pearla never asked what they thought of her. She didn't need to. She had a home now, not just a roof. A life shaped by steady hands and quiet care. And when she slept, it was with her head on Preston's shoulder and his arm curled around her waist, both of them breathing in time with the land around them. Nothing was owed anymore. Everything was chosen. And they chose each other every single day.